It's that moment where you pause and you don't let your habit and your autopilot, so to speak, determine and dictate what you do. When you stop a habit, you have an opportunity for a different reaction and a different emotion.
This is the Energy Within podcast, all about accessing, nurturing, and building your energy and confidence so that you can embrace your true essence, be confident being yourself, accept your soul's mission, and start taking action on it. My name is Carrie Jokala. I am your host. I am a Reiki master teacher, a fitness instructor, a wife, a mom to 2 little boys, and this is episode 132. And today I'm really excited to bring back Morgan Rysdon. Morgan is an Alexander Technique teacher, and I don't remember the exact number of the episode, but if I remember, I'll try to link it in the show notes. But if you scroll back through, you will find that we did one other episode last year talking about the physical side of the Alexander Technique and what it addresses as far as your physical habits, the way that we sit, stand, walk, all of these things, noticing what happens physically in our bodies and the habits that we have around that and how we can change and shift those habits to shift our energy. What was brought up that we only had a very little bit of time to touch on in the last episode was the emotional side and how even starting with the physical side of things, how that will inevitably lead to opening up the emotional things that we've been hanging on to and the habits that we have around that and the way we react physically because of the emotional things that are going on and maybe how that might be contributing to other things that we're dealing with, whether it's some kind of physical pain or some kind of condition that we have that could potentially be traced back to something emotional. So I'm really excited to have you listen to this episode and how the Alexander Technique can help with this. It's too much to try to explain in a nutshell in the beginning here, so I'm just going to let you listen. In fact, Morgan and I even talk about how it's hard to explain a lot of things and you just have to experience it. So you have to experience this episode and I will move out of the way and let you listen to how the Alexander Technique helps with the emotional side of your life with Morgan Rysdon. Here we go. All right, well, Morgan, I am so excited to bring you back because I know we talked about so much last time and there was so much more to get to. So I'm really excited to get to the next half of it. So thank you for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me.
So just in case anyone hasn't listened or since it has been a while since you've been here, why don't you reintroduce yourself, let everybody know who you are and what you do?
So I am a nationally certified Alexander Technique teacher. That means that I help teach people how to use their bodies more efficiently in everyday life. So I look at the way that people stand, walk, move, sit, and find ways that there can be less compression, so less strain, less tension and tightness in their body. And then, of course, that also looks at the habits that they might have emotionally, habits that they have in thinking, and just helping people reevaluate what things are useful in the habits that they have or what things might no longer serve them moving forward. So I think about it as stepping into sort of an awareness and becoming more conscious in one's everyday life.
All these talks about habits that keep coming up. I have so many habits that I need to adjust or improve or recreate. It's getting better.
Like
though.
What? Like what kind of habits?
Well, one of them, for a while, I was really good about getting up early before my kids to, just have a little bit of me time, kind of wake up slowly, have my coffee in peace, and then focus on a few things that I wanted to do for the day because I know during that time I'm not going to be interrupted. And something about the last couple of weeks, I've just been so exhausted and I keep hitting snooze again and I'm just not getting up. I'm trying to also give myself grace though too. So like there's seasons, so.
I was just going to say that we're always in so much alignment. Yeah. Cause there's, I think, especially daylight savings that we just went through,
Yeah.
it really throws, it throws people off. But again, you already, even with that habit, you already are aware, right?
Hmm.
Oh, I really enjoyed getting up. It was helpful for me. So chances are for somebody like you, it won't be long before you resume that
Yeah.
habit,
Yeah.
right? It's not as though it's something that's going to be hard because you've never done it. Sounds
Right.
like maybe it just needs to, be reignited,
I think
so
so.
to speak.
Yeah, in the beginning, you're right. In the beginning, it was really hard to get back into that and to stay in that habit. But I also, I guess, semi intentionally set up a couple of things that would force me to have to get up, where I had to show up for somebody else. I did a 30-day chakra challenge, and I told everybody that it was going to be, each session would be really early in the morning because that's the only time I knew I could get it done, not be interrupted, and make sure that everybody had it for the rest of the day so that they could do it whenever they had time. So
I
I had
love
no
that.
choice but to get up. And then I started to get used to it again. So it was helpful, actually.
Yeah. I think there's some things that are easier for us to change, habits that are, for example, when I work with students, if they're coming to me, say, with neck pain or back pain, and they have a habit of the way that they're sitting at their desk, and I point out, if you sit differently or if we make a modification and they realize, oh, my pain has gone away, that's a habit typically that can be really easily adopted because it
Hmm.
makes such a significant difference, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes, if it's a little bit harder to see a direct response, a direct result of something that you feel like, oh, sometimes it can be a little bit harder.
Yeah. The lack of immediate gratification.
Exactly. Because the immediate gratification when you're in bed is the snooze button,
Yep.
right? It's so toasty and warm in here, snooze,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, I can relate.
Yeah. All right. So, like I was mentioning, I know we talked a lot about the physical aspect, like you were just talking about the habits of how we sit, stand, walk, all of that. But you had mentioned that there's an emotional side to all of this. So, I'll just kind of give you the floor and let you start at the beginning.
Yeah, I think we had mentioned towards the end, if I'm remembering, because now it's been a while, about what brought me to the Alexander
Yeah.
technique. So often my background is actually in theater. So I have a degrry in acting, and
Did
that
we
was
talk
my
about that? I
first.
was a theater major too.
Oh, no wonder we like each other so much.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I always like when I find those
No,
similarities.
I love being interrupted. I tell people I've got kids and a husband, like I'm always interrupted. No, I think, being at my university in my movement class, that was my first introduction to this work, to Alexander technique. And my teacher, he was a movement instructor, a stage combat. He did
Oh,
fighting
yeah.
scenes, etc. And then he was also getting certified in the Alexander technique. And so he had us do this weird exercise, this sort of self exploration in class. And we had this big, large mirror along the wall. And I remember putting one of my arms down that I had just finished working with. And no joke, it was like a foot longer than my other arm. And I just was so confused. And my curiosity was definitely piqued. I was like, what is going on? Why is one arm insanely longer than the other right now? I was like, Paul, what did you do? And so he was looking for, so that's what initially sort of piqued my curiosity and interest. I didn't really know exactly what it was. And even when I would go and study with my teacher, because he was being certified and he was going through his own training to be a teacher, our work is typically very hands on. So he didn't do a lot of talking to me as the student. He really just, worked on me. And so I just received all of this wonderful, what we would call hands on experience. And I just felt high as a kite. My body was amazing. I just felt so loose and light and free. And I didn't know, you know, I've never done drugs, friend, but I'm assuming this is what people who do drugs feel like. Like, I just was like, oh my gosh, I want to feel like this all the time. It was
Hmm.
really, for me, it just felt really nice to feel free in my body. And up until that point, I think I was 18 or 19 at the time, I hadn't felt like that ever. So for me, it was an interesting introduction because I had only experienced my body in one way, which if you look at pictures of me from before, I was very pulled down. I had very poor posture. My shoulders were compressed. My spine was compressed. And I think, as I mentioned last time, I had had these two traumatic events in my life that significantly imprinted themselves on me. You know, the first one being when I was molested when I was 8 or 9 at the time. And then afterwards, my only brother, my only sibling, he died of meningitis when I was 15. It was 3 days after my 15th birthday. And he was 17 at the time.
Oh.
And it was such a quick, he died, you know, he wasn't feeling good at dinner. And by morning he was gone. And we were, you know, my parents and I, we were on a family reunion. All my other extended family had left. It was just my own immediate family. And here we are in Nassau, Bahamas, like at a hospital. Like it was just a weird, bizarre, traumatic experience. And, you know, for me at the time, I was like really just, I guess surviving is the way I think about it, is that you just kind of put one foot in front of the other and you just go through the motions. And my, you know, my approach was really just pushing forward and ignoring that I had any problems with anything. And I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress and tension. I felt overwhelmed a lot, probably self-inflicted. My parents are lovely individuals, so it's not as though they were putting any pressure on me. It was much more self. It was my own self talk, encouraging me to perform at a certain level. And I showed up in the world as a very tight, tense individual. And so these things that I had experienced at very young ages, I think then turned into the ways in which I moved around the world and in the way that I interacted with people. And I responded. How did I respond? I responded from a state of fight or flight, a state of stress, always anxious, always, you know, just overactive with regard to my stress response. And so as I began learning more about this work, it's almost like a braid coming untied. It really felt like my whole nervous system was learning what it meant to be safe and calm, which I hadn't had for so long.
Yeah.
And, you know, it wasn't until sometimes I tell my husband, because I think it was my 3rd year in my training. So Alexander Technique teachers go through a 3-year, over 1,600 hour certification program. Yeah. So the first year, for example, we don't even get to touch anybody, you know? So I say it's a hands-on modality, but the first year is really work on yourself. They call it self-work. You learn your body, how to work on your own self. And then after that, they give you like a ball and they say, pretend it's a head. You're like, I want to touch somebody's head. You know, this whole process that you go through. But by my I think it was going into my 2nd or my 3rd year, I told my husband, I think I'm finally ready to dive into some deep therapy to address these other issues. And I felt open in my body physically, that then mentally and emotionally, I felt ready. You know, I tried therapy. I wasn't stupid. I knew like that would be helpful, you know, but I quit. If it got hard, if I didn't like what I was hearing, if it felt unattainable, I left. I just always left because I was like, you know, I don't have time for this. It's not working. It's not, and until that, you know, 2nd or 3rd year of training, when I decided to go see somebody, I think I stuck with it 2 years every week, going to my therapist. And then afterwards, feeling so much better. And, you know, I was telling my husband, therapy has changed my life. And he's like, babe, you wouldn't have even gotten into therapy if it wasn't for Alexander Technique. He's like, there's no way. Like you weren't capable of sticking through it and working on what needed to be worked on. And this work really physically started to open me up so that I felt safe enough to open up, I think, the emotional components, the habitual thought patterns, and to really, we call it inhibition. So in Alexander Technique, we have these jargon words that we use, but when we talk about inhibition, it's this pausing to our habit, the habitual response that we have to whatever it is. So for example, our kid, because you and I are both moms, so our kid knocks over juice and it's all over the kitchen table. And maybe the initial response, because we're running around, we're trying to get dinner on the table, we just cleaned it off and now there's juice and it's going to stick and, right, all the thoughts.
Yep.
Instead of just yelling, like, you have to be more careful, that moment that you pause, decide, I don't want to do that. So what could I do instead? Right? So you pause long enough to say, I'm not going to do that, but instead saying, can you please go get some paper towels, or can you get that rag wet? And we're going to work on this together to clean this up. It's that moment where you pause and you don't let your habit and your autopilot, so to speak, determine and dictate what you do. And we look at that as Alexander Technique teachers. We look at that mostly with regard to the way you sit, the way you stand, the way you walk, because those are reflective of the way you use your body in all of your activities. The difference with those activities, however, right, the sitting and standing, people don't usually have an emotional attachment to them. It's like, I just sit because I have to go to the bathroom or I'm eating. Right? But if you're sitting at your computer and you get an email that sparks some sort of emotional response from you, all of a sudden a lot more is happening. And so Alexander Technique gives you tools to notice what happened to my body. Oh my gosh, my neck just got so tight. But for example, if the email was an invitation to your best girlfriend's, baby shower or wedding, that might be a completely different physical response. And being able to identify, how is my body responding to these two different situations? Technically, my body is in the same place. I'm sitting in front of my computer, but your body is having a physical reaction to what's happening. And when we talk about emotions or we talk about thoughts that you have, your body is still responding, even if it's not so overt that, an outsider would be able to tell. You on the inside might be able to tell. And that usually for a lot of people ends up turning into things like irritable bowel syndrome or chronic digestive issues or migraines or, TMJ. People start clenching their jaw at night. And, you could get a night guard, right? You can just get yourself a night guard for the TMJ, or you can start to evaluate and start to kind of slow down and pause to say, well, why am I responding in this tight manner? And then noticing throughout the day when, your partner says to you, I'm not going to be able to do what you needed me to do that's really important. And noticing, oh my gosh, I just clenched my jaw when he or she said that. When they said that, my entire jaw just ripped. Holy cow. But I'm spending all this money on night guards and I don't want a tight jaw. So pausing, and then we call it direction. So Alexander Technique teachers call the next step, so to speak, as direction. And then it's, what do you do instead? So I don't want to clench my jaw. So instead, I'm going to allow my neck muscles to relax. I'm going to allow my head to move forward and up, my torso to lengthen. And we have all these directions. And they're basically what to do to expand into your full length and width so that you have space in your body to calm your nervous system down, to enter into that parasympathetic nervous system, and to allow that fight or flight response to sort of do its course, but not to get stuck.
Sure.
I always think of the recycle sign, and I think about people's stress pattern getting sort of stuck like that. And it's finding an exit, to be like there are rest stops. And I think when we talk about emotions and stuff, people pack it in there. They pack it down, they put it someplace deep inside, and, they show up, they get dressed, they go to work, they show up for people, but then they maybe snap. Or maybe then they deal with these migraines every single day and they don't know why. Or maybe they cry all of a sudden at an Alexander Technique lesson, or in your case, a Reiki session. And they're like, but I don't know why I'm crying.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we don't either. And it's honestly none of our business, and, unless they care to share, but it's the body's response, and it's letting go of toxic holding. And we would call it tightening and tension. And tears, if you think about it, they're chemicals that have to, our body wants to let that out. And so it's really interesting how the body will keep that stuff and will remind you and will keep showing up and kind of get louder in some instances. People will say, it started as a little something and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I just find that the more people start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, with regard to the habits that they have, then they realize, oh, I started compressing my shoulders because I felt fat and I wanted to see my collarbones. Oh, that's interesting. When my shoulders were rounded forward, you could see that. And then I felt skinnier. Like all of a sudden habits have a place that they've come from, that they've been born of. And while I don't always think those are, as my one colleague says, I don't think the reason for those things are always that important to know, but they're really interesting. We like to know where habits come from, but they're not always that important. And so when I talk to people about the Alexander Technique, or they come in 2 sessions with me to learn, they start studying, they usually come for one thing and they get so much more. It's like, I came because I wanted to not be slouching over my computer and my neck was hurting. And then they're like, wow, I'm ready to do more public speaking. I'd like to apply for that position at work that I just never felt confident enough to step into. But now, now I feel ready to take the next step. Now I feel ready to step into my full potential. And I don't feel like I'm in my way anymore. I feel like I'm at my best. And I think when you have emotional burdens and you've got stuff that you are running away from or not addressing, it's harder to do that. It's harder to move forward.
So yeah, you've triggered a few different thoughts in my brain, and the way my brain works is just, all over the place. But I'm working on embracing that more and just accepting that that's just how my brain is, and we'll just go with it. But for one, the habits and the learning to take the pause that is so relevant for me right now, especially as a mom. And, the example that you gave, even just remembering to take that pause, because sometimes I'm really good about it and like, it's not a big deal. It's just a little spill, or it's just a little this or whatever. But then there are other times when like, there's so much screaming or fighting, or, the 2 boys are bothering each other and they won't leave. Like the moment you turn your back, they start screaming again. And then it's just this whole thing. And I keep noticing myself how much stress I'm holding in my whole back for much of the day when things like that are going on. Because once it finally stops, then I notice what's going on in my body. So I'm not noticing while it's happening, but I'm noticing after, like, oh God, I'm really tense. Like, and trying to work on releasing that and then not allowing it to get to that point again, if that kind of makes sense. Like I'm trying to.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It always starts, and I think we spoke of this last time, this concept of awareness, knowing what's happening in the moment. And quite honestly, a lot of people don't recognize in the moment. They go, oh, I don't even realize. I had a student the other day and he said, he does a lot of work at the computer. And so I just pulled the computer out. So I took my laptop out in his lesson, and he said, wow, I just recognized that just seeing your computer, not even his, just seeing your computer, my forearms began to get tight.
Oh.
So that automatic conditioning that has happened for so many, which, let's face it, if our house is on fire, friend, like it's a good thing that we don't have to stop to think about what to do, right? Like, oh my gosh, let me slowly get my shoe on. No,
right.
It's like you want to get out of the burning house. However, if we recognize that, oh, that's not helpful, I don't want to feel like my back is hurting. It's usually, in your case, for example, the example that you gave with the children, it's pretty safe to assume that if the kids are starting to bicker and you're in a room with them trying to, mediate, that your back is already tight.
Yeah.
It's pretty safe to assume that. So knowing that then, and saying, I'm going to prioritize for a moment, just a split second long enough to say, can I relax my back? And then maybe I'll still yell at them, or maybe I'll decide to do something else. Can you come with me? I want to show you guys something outside. Oh, what's she showing us outside? I'm going to take you outside. Maybe we're going to talk about the conflict outside. It was a toy related something. I've taken you into another room. And I find that when I give myself what we call inhibition, that pause, when I practice inhibition on my own in my relationships, my next steps are always better.
Yeah.
Not just for me, but for other people. I always get more from it. Right. And a wonderful example is even my children, my girls, we were headed to the pool the other day, and my daughter, well, this was, I guess, over the summer. And when we were headed to the pool, I was giving my oldest daughter a lecture about being responsible. She had lost something, like a watch that she needed to have. And we're on our third watch. I'm like, come on, kiddo. If each watch is $25, I'm like breaking it down for her. It's $75 now. If I buy it again, it's $100,
Yeah.
So I'm talking to her about this, and I'm lecturing. I'm in the car lecturing, but she's getting upset in the back seat. And my other daughter, Ilya, who, is 4 at the time, she interrupted me and said, "Hey, Mom, I think you're making Naya really upset." And I said, "I'm sorry." I just stopped. I mean, I probably knew that, but I was trying to get a point across.
Yeah.
But clearly the point had gotten across, because even my 4-year-old was like, "Okay, Mom, easy." And it was an interesting moment for me, because I realized, A, my kids know so much more than I ever knew at that age. And B, the opportunity for them to also help me be a better mom.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Thank you, Ilya. And Naya, I'm sorry that I'm yelling at you." My daughter said, "Mom, it's okay." She said, I hear what you're saying, and we all make mistakes. I know you just care about the what. She forgave me instantly. It was like such a beautiful moment. And then, of course, now I'm crying, because I'm like, and I was just lecturing you for so long, And so at dinner, I brought it up again, and I said it was really helpful, because even moms have a hard time stopping, so I appreciated, I told my youngest, I said, "I appreciated you helping me, And then I even encouraged Naya. I said, "Naya, if I was upsetting you, you could have also stopped me, And I wasn't screaming. I was driving a car. They're in the back seat, but they got the point. Naya understood. She got the point. But I think sometimes we don't always welcome help from outside people to help us stop. Usually, I take the example of a spouse. In relationships, we go back and forth, and it's like, "Stop yelling." That's not the best way to get somebody to stop yelling, right?
Yeah.
But the idea behind it is possibly good, because maybe somebody has told in moments of calmness, sometimes after work, that's the worst time. Much more easily, I'm triggered. And so if you can help me in those moments, it would be helpful. Like, maybe the intention is there, but in the heat of the moment, you're not able to actually act on that with that sort of mindfulness. Instead, the habitual reaction automatically comes in. And again, the same emotion happens, where when you stop a habit, you have an opportunity for a different reaction and a different emotion. So to bring it back to my experience, even for example, with the therapy, when I was in my talk therapy and I recognized, oh, we're talking about something that doesn't make me happy. Oh, my throat is starting to clog up. I feel like I'm getting a sore throat almost instantaneously. Wow, isn't that interesting? So I allowed myself to step into curiosity and interest about what was going on, versus let me run the other direction to safety and let me shut down because I don't want to hear it, which was my old pattern. My old pattern was like, "I'm right, you're wrong. I don't want to hear it. I'm getting anxious, and now I'm not happy." But now I could sit in that place long enough to process, and then to calm myself down. Oh, I'm holding my breath.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can allow my shoulders. Oh, I'm kind of coming up out of the seat. Like, I literally physically want to run away right now. Let me come back into the seat. Okay. That's more comfortable. I still don't like what you have to say to me. I don't like what I'm feeling. I feel my heart beating. I feel my heart going faster. I'm starting to get dry mouth. Whatever somebody's physical response is to their emotional trauma that they're dealing with, you can start to step back and really see physically how the body is starting to respond. And that to me is amazing.
Yeah. So at what point when you were first introduced to the Alexander technique, when did you really catch on that it could help with the emotional side of things? Was that pretty early on, like right away, or was it more physical to start?
That's a great question. I think for me, to be honest, I think for me, because I was in such denial and in such a state of just survival, I don't think I associated it. And I'll tell you another thing that I noticed, which it's funny, when I became certified as a teacher, I initially was really upset with my previous teachers. I had maybe had 4 or 5 Alexander teachers
Okay.
before I decided to become certified. You try different teachers.
Sure.
I moved from Chicago then to New York. Anyway, and I thought to myself, my teachers taught me nothing because, I thought I could have learned so much more. I could have been doing this on my own. I was so dependent on them to help me physically and emotionally feel good. So I needed quote, this is my belief system. I thought I needed their hands. I needed my session with them. I needed to have that experience. It was very experiential. And I relied heavily on them. And then through my 3 years of training, I realized you're not doing it. Like, I am giving you permission. Physically, I am letting my body respond and you're just guiding me. But I'm the one who's actually doing it. And I didn't feel like my teachers at that point had facilitated me learning to do it on my own. So now, as a private practice of my own, I'm always teaching my students and I'm pointing out, that's not me, that's you. And they're like, oh, you make me feel good. And I'm like, no, I'm helping you and I'm teaching you, but ultimately I want you to learn to do that. I don't want you to need me. I want you to want me. So it's the idea of like, can you cook? Yes. But would I rather cook with somebody else? Of course. It's more company. It's nice.
Yeah.
But you can cook alone. You can do it, And so I spent, honestly, probably the first 2 or 3 years of my teaching practice. I was like, my first 2 years of teaching, I thought my teachers were not that good because they didn't, I still loved and respected them, but I felt that they had not done me a service. And then I matured a little. And I thought, as I got on with my teaching, then I realized my teachers were brilliant because reflecting on who I was at the time that I started, again, I was probably 18 or 19. If I thought even for a split second that this was anything more than me just receiving and that I actually had to work and think at it, I would have run away.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the therapy. I would have been like, I don't like what's happening and I don't want to have to be responsible and I don't want to have to do it. I would have run away for sure. So then I flipped to the other side. My teachers were brilliant. They totally, the teacher, it's that idea, the teacher, trainer, whomever, right, meets you where you're at.
Yeah.
They're able to see. And I think I was, again, I keep thinking always about my photos because visuals are really helpful to see. And when you look at pictures of me in the past, you can see I was so sad. I was so depressed. I was so anxious and really pulled down in myself. And so, of course, somebody just wants to give that young woman like a break and be safe in her body and say, it's okay. You don't have to run away from this thing and you don't have to fall into yourself. You can come up and out. And so I think there's this there was for me a moment of stepping into realizing, oh, this is something that'll help me. And that happened probably during my training when I decided to go into the therapy. But initially, when I first began studying, no, I just knew physically my body felt good. And in fact, my definition, when my friend said, what is this you're doing? I would say, I can't explain it. It's an experience and you have to go have one. Like that was which is not great marketing.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to, people are like, I'm not going to try that. You can't even tell me what it is. Right.
I feel that way when people would ask me about like a book I was reading that was just so filled with such good information. And I'd be like, well, what's it about? I'm like, well, just go read the book. You just have to read it because there's some things it's just too hard to describe without having the experience.
Usually so much, right? With those books and with these kinds of modalities, there's so much. It depends on who you are.
Yeah.
What are you going to benefit? How are you going to take that novel or that experience? And I have students who will come in their first lesson and they will cry and they're like, but we didn't do anything. Like you sat me in a chair, you stood me up and you put me on a table. Why is this happening? And again, it goes back to, I don't know how important it is. It's more interesting. But I think when we start to kind of slow down and really give ourselves a moment to reflect on ourselves, we call it work in the sense of like working on oneself. When you give yourself that time and space, you get to see a bigger picture of how you're responding. And then you get to make decisions because none of us want to be the mom who's yelling and screaming at her kids. Like, if you stopped us in a moment of calmness with our girlfriend, like, that's not the kind of parents we want to be. That's not the kind of friend we want to be or spouse we want to be. However, in those moments, no, you said you were going to pick up the kids and I have a work, and did it. And it's never about that.
Yeah.
You know, in acting, it was the scene was, I don't know if you heard this when you were going to school, but my teacher used to say it's not about the turkey, right? So it's the mom and the daughter. It's the mom and the daughter at Thanksgiving, and they're arguing about keeping the turkey in the oven, right? And it's like the mom's like, well, sweetheart, you got to keep the turkey in. And then the daughter's like, no, it's time to take the turkey out. Like, and they go back and forth. And it's like, not really about that.
Yeah.
It's about, you're always telling me what to do. Well, you never do what's right. And you don't ever do it the way that it should be done. Like, and this battle that when you pause, maybe one of those moms could say, well, why don't you try it your way this year? And then maybe next year we'll try it my way. Because I think it might be different. And we don't really know whose way is the right way. But instead, they just have the struggle and they don't actually address what's really going on, which is you have different ways that you try to cook, or you have different ways of doing things than I do. And so by pausing long enough to recognize the habits we have in the way that we interact, not just with other people, but also with ourselves. How am I constantly reacting to life and to my circumstances and my situations? And is it from a place where I have a moment to pause and reassess and make a good choice? Or is it from a habitual, automatic, I have to be like this. This has to get done. And does that make sense?
Yeah. No,
you can
edit
that part.
Maybe I'll leave it in.
You have your work cut out for you. Me, the mompreneur over here. You're killing me.
Well, I actually was thinking as you were talking about that pause and how someone can end up crying because of this pause and not knowing why. I'm sure it's because we never take that pause. Like, we might even be subconsciously even afraid of that pause because we know that kind of stuff is going to come into that space when we do pause.
Yeah. Yeah. And people don't want to feel bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. We don't, but it feels so good sometimes at the end to have a good cry, you know, and to let things, I really think about it as like letting things go in order to move on. You know, that's like even grief, you know, to be able to move through loss or to move through grief and sadness, not to avoid it or distract or replace, but to just move forward. And I think in our society, my belief is that we have a lot of distractions in place that we want to, you know, so that people don't have to feel bad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, they can coexist. Things can be beautiful and ugly kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like there are things in this world that is very much the case where you see beauty and sadness coexisting. But I think for us and our sanity to feel good about ourselves, we're like, no. We just like to see pretty.
Yeah.
You know, we just like to see it looking good.
Yeah.
You know?
And that goes right back to a quote, a movie quote that popped into my head during one of the things you were saying before about holding the emotions inside and just letting it all build up. Have you ever seen the movie What About Bob?
Yes.
Yeah. I quote
that dates us. That dates us. But yes.
I quote that movie all the time. I've even made a couple reels using audio from that movie. And this is actually another audio I want to use. I just haven't done it yet. But when he's all tied up and he's thinking that it's part of his therapy and he's trying to figure out what it means. But it's actually so relevant because he's like, okay, I'm all tied up. You're saying that I'm all tied up inside. And these phony bombs mean that if I don't untie myself inside the emotional knots, I'm going to explode. And it's like, yeah, it's funny. It's a comedic movie. And you realize like that's not actually what's going on, but he's interpreting it that way. But it's actually right. Because if you don't untie these knots or let go of the stuff you're holding on to, you will explode in some way at some point.
That reminds me, I had a student on Monday and he was sharing, and he's probably 89, I think at this point, but he's told me the story before, but I forgot. And he reminded me of the story of when he was sitting at a dinner with somebody. He said, and I looked down, they had gotten up to go to the bathroom or something. He said, I looked down and my napkin was in a huge knot. He said, all my knuckles were purple. He said, and I had no consciousness of doing that. He said, so immediately from that moment on, he said, as soon as I left the restaurant, he said, I went down to wherever, I stepped off of a board. I went over to this other place and I stepped down from responsibility. He started taking away all these things he knew. I'm too stressed. I have too many responsibilities because this is happening when I'm at a lunch. I should be enjoying myself. And this napkin.
Yeah.
So to physically see something like that and then recognize, oh, I don't need to do that. That's not a good sign.
Yeah.
You know, and I pointed out with people's fists, I'll say things like, you know, make a fist, and people will show me their fist and they'll, you know, usually grip it and pull it up. And I'm like, well, what if my daughter had just found the most beautiful butterfly with a broken wing and she asked you to carefully put it someplace and not, you know, you might have a fist, but it would be much more gentle.
Yeah.
You know, and we just go to the fist and we associate fist must mean lots of tension, lots of strain.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think Alexander technique is about pausing long enough to decide, well, she just asked me on a podcast to make a fist. I don't need to make it really hard. I can just close my fingers together.
Yeah.
You know, and then those kinds of habits affect how we feel in our body and continue to give us those relaxation responses so that hopefully when we have emotional reactions, et cetera, we're a little bit calmer because in general, I'm not always tight.
Yeah.
I'm from a place where my neutral is not already at a 5.5. My neutral's at closer to a 1 or a 0, a 2, maybe, you know, but I'm usually down here.
Yeah.
Versus I'm quick to jump off, you know, towards the 10.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, and I'm sure every case is individual and very different, but I don't know if there's an overall that you tend to see. So if someone now knows that the Alexander technique can help with the emotional side of things and they know there's something they want to work on, would you typically recommend that someone also considers talk therapy or some other form of therapy in addition to the Alexander technique? Or are there things that
That's
kind
a good
of
question.
can be taken care of? Like I said, I know I'm sure it's probably individual, but I don't know if there's like a typical response.
But I think the answer is probably the same. And correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like Reiki, you probably get similar experiences, right?
Yeah.
Any type of body work or modality that helps people, you're bound to have things like this come through.
Right.
And in my experience, I always tell students to seek out things that are going to help them feel better. You don't know unless you try.
Yeah.
I don't think there is one way. And just like, you know, at the beginning you were talking about, oh, I was so good at it before. I feel like you might want to try therapy, but then maybe now is not a good time because in your season of life, you just had a baby. You don't have to, you're already doing a lot, you know? So I encourage students to do what works for them in the moment, whether it's reading a book, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube. But I do let them know my experience. So I always share from my personal perspective, like this has been my experience. It was very helpful for me. And I also let them know about my students who've had similar experiences where it's been helpful. But I don't necessarily suggest like you should also in tandem with, it's not always necessary, you know, and in some cases people have come to me where they've done a lot of therapy, but things are still, and then all of a sudden they do Alexander technique and they're like, everything okay.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they've talked the emotion out, but it's still in there physically.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but I don't necessarily suggest you need to or you have to. I just let them know, like, when you're listening to yourself, we always know the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We always know, like, this would be good for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do it right now, but this would be good for me. Or I don't want to do it right now, but because it's going to be good for me, I will do it. And I know I'll start to benefit, or I'll give myself a timeline, you know?
Yeah.
But what I see a lot of in my practice, in my personal teaching practice, is tons of shifts and changes. People transform right before my eyes, like physically, emotionally, energetically, mentally. People usually quit jobs. They
Wow.
change relationships, whether they get married or get divorced, like, I feel like there's lots of, but it always seems very big in front of me because there's like a visual. We can see a change,
Yeah.
right? And there's, I love this story about a woman in New York who had come to me and she had some neck and shoulder stuff. And then she came, I don't know, maybe like 6 weeks later, and she'd take a new passport photo. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, look at my passport. Like, look at the difference." And it was, such an interesting, she's like, "I didn't know that I was going to look this much more attractive doing all this stuff. And then she went off, I think, to visit some friends in Pennsylvania. And she came back and she's like, everybody was like, "What are you doing? You seem different." Like, people pick up on a
Yeah.
different energy when you're not stuck
Yep.
energetically or physically. They see it in your face. They see brightness and color. They see alive eyes and if you're tense, those mirror neurons, I don't know if in Reiki they talk about mirror neurons, but this idea
No, but I
that,
know I've heard about that. Yeah.
yeah, how the neurons sort of like mirror one another. So if you're really excited and you're like, "Oh my gosh, my son just did this amazing thing," then I would get excited with you
Yeah.
because I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool," right? But if I say, "Oh my gosh, my dog died, we had to put her down," like, you'd be like, "Oh," it's that exchange of neurons that we literally change with people. So when you start getting rid of tension and stress and strain in your body, people, that resonates with people. It's attractive to people.
Yeah.
People want to be around that. They're like, "Oh, I feel so calm around you. I feel safe and nice." And then and then juxtaposed to other people, you notice like, "Oh, I'm getting tight being around so and so." Like, okay, I can still breathe, just because their neurons are trying to mirror, like, no, let me be the good. Let me solicit the calmness and find the peace and tranquility right now. And then you could sort of have a way of changing the way you interact with people,
Yeah.
because you're no longer as anxious or coming from a place of, overwhelm or stress. You're a little calmer in your nervous system.
Yeah. I love work like this, like anything that I don't want to say, it's not like in a sense of tricking anybody or making a switch or something like that, but like this idea where people come in thinking it's going to be for one thing that they're coming to you for, and then it turns out to be something completely different, but that's also life changing. Like, I think that's so awesome. Like, I love when that happens, when people come and they're like, "Yeah, I want to focus on this during our Reiki session." And then we uncover like, "Oh, there's actually some inner child work to go to go through here."
Yeah.
And then I have one
Yeah.
woman who, like, she's a friend, so it was a friendly, joking one, but like we uncovered something where it was kind of like a switch like that. And then I'm like explaining it to her, like what I was picking up on. And I open my eyes and I look and she's like jokingly flipping me off. Like, "Yeah, well, yep, okay, we're spot
Yeah.
on. We got this."
Yeah. I think it's always funny too, because when people ask me, like, what are the benefits or something? It's always, do I tell you the truth?
Yeah.
You know, do I tell you the truth? Because it sounds a little weird. Like, I'm going to help you with everything in your life from now until forever.
Yeah. I'm going
Or,
to adjust the way you sit and then you're going to quit your job.
yes, yes, right. It's such a funny, like, but I think that it gets people realizing it gives them a moment to reflect. Kind of like
Mhm.
the pandemic allowed people to
Yeah.
it forced people into reflection and into what's important and reevaluating. I think my work, Alexander Technique, really does that for people, because we're asking them to slow down and to notice things and then to pause long enough to decide what to do next. You're not always going to make the right decisions. I still
Yeah.
I definitely still yell at my kids from time to time. Okay. But hopefully not as much as if I wasn't unconscious, if I was walking around unconsciously and I wasn't in a space where I'm, showing up hopefully more mindfully than the
Mhm.
average person,
Yeah.
because we do a lot of sitting and standing, what we call chair work. But I tell people I could look at anything you do and I could still teach you the Alexander Technique. But again, nobody cares about sitting and standing. So that's the easiest,
Yeah.
because it's just sitting, standing, sitting, standing. There's no emotional anything to it. And if you can notice, oh, I really want to lift out of it. Why am I always lifting? Oh, I noticed that at the chair at the meeting. Oh, I noticed that when I'm getting ready to talk with my big family because I never can get a word in. Oh, okay. But what if I just allow myself to widen into my back? Oh, that feels better, you know?
Mhm.
So teaching people how to take up their space, how to give themselves permission to take time. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want that?
Well, I think all of this is just such a great testament to how truly connected all the facets of us are. The mind, body, and spirit is so connected. If you're hanging on to something in your body, if you're behaving a certain way physically, it's ultimately probably tied to some type of emotion or something else that's going on, and it's just a matter of uncovering that, really. I mean, I may oversimplifying it, but you know what I mean? Like, it's going to lead
Yeah.
back to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people don't want to do that work, right? Some people Reiki is not for, and Alexander techniques not for.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is like, oh, my mother would really like, my husband should, I always say they're always welcome,
Mm-hmm.
but they get to decide if they want to do it,
Yeah.
because you can't make somebody, you really should learn Spanish, or you should really learn the violin. Like, yeah, people who play the violin love it. People who learn maybe German love it, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to.
Right.
And, when I teach people, I say they have to, but hopefully they want to learn it when they come, so that they're learning and I'm teaching. And if they're there begrudgingly because somebody sent them, that's not a good, I'm sure the same thing with Reiki and other kinds of modalities. It's just, they're not fully present because they're already at their next appointment or someplace else.
Well, I think a little bit when you say that about when I did personal training, and it was only a couple times, but there were a few times where the kids would be brought in, like the older kids, when they reached the age where they could be trained to use the equipment on the floor so they could go out on their own. And a few times some parents were like, yeah, I want to sign them up for some lessons, and we're going to, blah, blah, blah. And you can tell like the kid's already so not interested. And then you're going to leave me alone with this kid who has no interest in being here. Now, some of them, like one of the kids that I worked with, it was his decision. Like, he really wanted to be there. And I really enjoyed his sessions because he was so excited about it and so happy to learn everything and sharing with me all this stuff that he learned on his own, and a couple other kids who, like, it was their decision. But the ones where it was the parents saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to sign him up for this many sessions, they were the longest. Even just the half-hour sessions, like, it was like the longest half hour of my life.
Yep. Well, and it's funny because, that happens all the time. I think, I had a student and she's been coming for a long time, and she always said to me, my husband would really benefit, his knee, ... I think it was 4 or 5 years before he came. And then he loved it. She was right. He loved it. So it wasn't even a hard conversion, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Like, he really did enjoy it, and he benefited, and he liked it, but I think, and what's awesome actually to add to that is when you have couples learning Alexander technique, either siblings or mother-daughter or, whatever, a couple, when you have people who are learning together, they tend to learn faster because they can talk about it at home, and they can notice things and help each other out. So that's always really interesting to me. But again, that's not always going to be the case.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what my husband likes to do in his spare time is not always necessarily what I like to do. Right?
Yeah.
So it's nice when it works out, but it's not always the case.
Right. Well, this has been so fun. I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk about all of this, because I feel like we really got to do a deeper dive into the Alexander technique this way. Is there anything that we didn't talk about regarding the emotional side that you think would be important to mention?
I just did a conversation with a student of mine I've had for a while now. And she talked about, I said, what's the one thing you feel like you've learned from working with me in the last several years? And she said, not to judge myself with the things that I'm experiencing. And I think that's a valuable skill and tool when you're approaching emotional trauma or any sort of experiences that you might be reliving or trying to digest and sort of process as an adult. And this ability to step away and to just observe for observation's sake. Oh, I'm crying hysterically. No judgment. I don't feel bad about crying hysterically. I don't feel guilty or shamed. I don't feel burdened by it. It is what it is. I'm crying. Or, oh, I'm screaming and I want to hit a wall. Oh, I really want to hit a wall. Wow. I want to break things. And noticing like an anger or a rage without attaching the judgment to it.
Yeah.
so that it is what it is. I think that's really helpful when people are processing emotional things. And again, I think those things can come through studying the Alexander technique, about those awareness, what we call inhibition and direction. We teach these principles, means whereby, this is all jargon, but it's basically that there's a process. And that when you follow the process, you're able to interrupt the patterns that don't serve you, the things that don't help. Just because I do it all the time doesn't mean it helps me.
Yeah.
So I'm always asking people, because they'll be like, well, this is comfortable. And I'm like, well, is it familiar? And that's why it's comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Or is it actually comfortable? Like, would you want to sit here or stay here or feel this way? Well, yeah, I do feel a little anxious and I do feel a little this and I do, okay. And then deciding, what do we do instead? And exploring, giving yourself permission to play and explore. And things take time, processes take time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I tease. Sometimes I tease people. I don't know anything that takes as long to learn as Alexander. But it works.
Yeah.
It works. And I just to be able to learn something that you can then apply again and again, you're only going to get better, which is why it's called a technique. It's a skill. The more you do it, the better you get. The better you get, the more you're like, oh, I have more I can do. Mm-hmm. Oh, even this. Wow. Oh, my mother-in-law, I just saw that name on my thing and it struck me. Okay. It's just a call. Like if that call was somebody else missing, like if it was a different missed call, I'd have a different response. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Very helpful. And it's interesting actually that you bring up separating and not having the judgment towards what you're feeling, because I just did a releasing meditation for the podcast, and part of the focus was you are not your emotions. You have emotions, you have thoughts, but they are not you, Yeah.
So. Yeah. I mean, we all deserve to feel good. We all deserve to feel like, you know what I mean? And so whatever you're experiencing, that just means you're human.
Yeah, exactly.
You're human if you feel different kinds of feelings, and they don't define you. Mm-hmm. They're just what is happening right now.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and then where do you take it from there? And where do you focus your energy and your attention? Any of us would go crazy if we kept focusing on something that was negative, that irritated us. Right. It's like, I always think of I teach in a lot of analogies. So I always tell people, it's like if you lived in a big house, but your teenager had like music from a big stereo blaring and you're really irritated. It's like, if you focus on that, right, it gets all your attention.
Yeah.
So that teenager with the loud music is sort of like if you had pain in your body in, say, your knees or your back, and you just let it be the only thing you focus on, versus there's this entire beautiful house. Yes, I hear some noise in that room. Yes, I experience a little bit of pain, but am I scrunching up my neck because my knee hurts? Am I tightening my jaw if that music is really loud, so to speak? And is that contributing to my TMJ? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So giving yourself, realizing all these areas that you do have control over. We don't have a lot of control as people. Things are happening in the world we cannot control immediately. And that's hard for people.
Yeah.
Right? We want to have control. So in the sense of what can I control in my own life? And can I start to think about letting things go and releasing tension and strain and habits, versus I'm just on autopilot. I'm reacting all the time. I feel like I'm never put together and I'm stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. And no, you can pause. Everybody has a moment to pause.
Yeah.
And they can let their breath out. And they can start, moving from that space where they're just a little bit easier in their bodies and in their minds.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love this so much.
I know. We could geek out all
right?
day.
We could just keep going. Well, why don't you let everyone know how they can find you and connect with you?
I thank you for asking. I have a YouTube channel, and that's Morgan Rysdon, Rysdon, and they can search me there. I've got lots of videos on different topics. So there's a plethora of topics that I cover there. And I try to keep them sort of short and sweet. So bite-sized information. So not a lot of videos over 12 minutes. And then I also have a newsletter that they can join, where I send weekly newsletter out. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Center Studio. So that's AT for Alexander Technique Center Studio.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming back, Morgan. This was so fun.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Well, that was so fun. I really am so glad that we were able to have that conversation because I was, last time we chatted, really interested in hearing about that side, but we had already gone so long with the physical aspect of things that we just didn't have time to get to it. So I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation today. I hope that this gave you some new information, some new perspective on how all the aspects of you tie together, how important it is to address all aspects of you and to see how and why they tie together so that you can make progress, move forward, open up, release pain, tension, anxiety, all of those things that we tend to have and hang on to that, in my opinion, way too many of us have today that I don't think we all need to have. I don't think anybody needs to have it, but you know what I mean. I think there's a lot that can be changed for the better if we were to just take that pause, like Morgan was saying, slow down and just start with becoming aware. And don't judge yourself. All of those great points that we all need to remember as often as possible and just do your best. That's all you need to do. If this sounds like something that you believe would help you and you would like to get more information or maybe even work directly with Morgan, please look in the show notes. You will find all of her links there for her YouTube, how to connect with her. All of those things will be in the show notes. Of course, as always, I would also love to invite you to come do a Reiki session with me. We have ways there of taking you from one thing to another. I have a lot of those experiences too, where people will come for one thing and then we end up in a totally different direction. Or people come in not really knowing what they want to focus on, and it's let's just see what happens. And it hits on something that maybe they didn't think would come up, or they knew they needed to deal with, but they've kind of been pushing it to the side. So if you're ready to address whatever may come up, the link for how to work with me is also in the show notes, so please check those out. If you are not already inside the Energy Within Facebook group, you'll find the link for that in the show notes, and I would love to see you in there. Just please make sure that you answer the questions. I tend to reject requests to join if the questions aren't answered, just because I'm very protective of that space and I don't want any creepers coming in. So if someone doesn't answer the questions, it could mean that maybe it's a fake account or some kind of scammer or spammer or something like that. So please just make sure you answer the questions. You don't have to give me your email if you don't want to, but do make sure that you please answer the questions. They're very simple. If you enjoyed this episode, if you got something out of it, if you found something interesting or notable, please share it. Go ahead and do a screenshot or a screen flow, a screen recording, and share it to your Instagram or your Facebook. Tag me, tag Morgan. Let us know what you liked and what stood out to you. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, and I'll see you next time.